Inside the top-floor corner office, the air conditioning hummed softly, chilling the space as if to match the man seated behind the walnut desk. Graham Langford, 38, Legacy CEO, dying slowly in a body that had betrayed him. His eyes, pale steel blue, scanned the latest test results on his tablet, Terminal. The word had lost its sting after the third diagnosis, but this update confirmed it. The experimental treatment had stalled. At best, he had a year. At worst, a few months. Outside the wide windows, the harbor shimmered, white sails dotting the water, tourists bustling along the cobblestones. Graham barely noticed. His family name was engraved in the foundation of half the city. But none of that legacy would survive if the Langford board shifted power to his brother, Elliot. Their grandfather's will was clear. The controlling shares would only pass to a married heir with legitimate issue. No child, no wife, no Langford empire. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Rosalind, his grandmother. "You have until the board meeting next quarter. Don't delay." Elliot is already making moves. Graham exhaled slowly, closed the tablet, and stood. The suit hung impeccably on his tall frame, but under the fine tailoring were tremors he kept hidden from everyone except his private physician. If his body wouldn't fight for his legacy, maybe strategy would. Cold, clear, clinical strategy. 3 miles away, in a cramped research lab beneath Charleston Medical Institute, Claire Bennett's gloved fingers trembled, not from disease, but from exhaustion. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours in days. A gene therapy sample swirled under her microscope, barely holding her attention. She pulled off the gloves and dropped them on the counter, her eyes shifting to her phone. 3 missed calls, all from the hospital. She didn't want to listen to the voicemail, but she already knew. Her father's condition was deteriorating again. The last treatment cycle had drained the last of her savings. The next round, not covered. The debt collectors were already circling. She checked her bank app. $47. Her hand trembled harder now. Not from fatigue, from fear. Claire Bennett was one of the brightest minds in the field of rare genetic disorders. Her published work was cited across the country. She'd been offered research positions in New York, in D.C., but she stayed in Charleston, close to her father, close to the memory of her mother, who died of the same hereditary condition she now studied obsessively. The lab door creaked open. "Claire?" Dr. Ruiz poked her head in, her voice careful, kind. "There's someone in the lobby asking for you. Says he's from Langford Holdings." Claire blinked. "Langford Holdings? What would they want with me? Beats me. But he's wearing a suit that costs more than my car. Go." "I'll finish your notes." Claire grabbed her blazer and ran her fingers through her hair. She didn't have the energy to look polished, just presentable. The man waiting in the marble-floored lobby had the kind of composed stiffness that screamed executive assistant. He smiled, crisp and professional. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Langford would like to meet with you, today, if possible." "It's a personal matter." "Graham Langford?" "Yes, ma'am. He requested you specifically." Claire's stomach sank. There was no context where that sentence ended well. "I don't understand. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a researcher." "I don't treat patients." The assistant nodded once. "He's aware." It took her 10 minutes to decide. She thought of her father. The bills, the voicemail waiting in her inbox, she was too afraid to play. "Fine," she said, swallowing the knot in her throat. "Lead the way." The Langford estate sat just outside the city, behind an iron gate and rows of crepe myrtles heavy with blossoms. As Claire stepped out of the car, she felt the dissonance settle in her bones. This world wasn't hers. Marble staircases, symmetrical hedges, everything pristine and hushed. She felt like she was trespassing in a museum curated by old money. The assistant led her through a quiet hall to a sunlit library. Graham Langford stood at the far window, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping the back of a leather chair. He turned when she entered, and in that moment, Claire understood what people meant when they said presence. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice low, smooth, measured. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "I didn't have much choice, did I?" Her voice was steady, but her fingers clutched her bag tighter than she realized. "I'm aware this is unusual. I'll get straight to the point." He gestured for her to sit. She did. "I'm terminally ill," he said. No emotion, just fact. My company is on the edge of a power shift I can't afford. My grandfather's will contains a clause. If I die unmarried and without a legal heir, everything passes to my younger brother. Claire waited. The silence stretched until she felt the pressure in her chest rise. "So why am I here?" she asked, though she already feared the answer. "Because I've read your research. I know about your father. Your financial situation, your drive, your ethics." Claire's heart dropped. He slid a folder across the desk. "I want to propose a marriage contract. 1 year. You will be legally my wife, in exchange for $5 million, disbursed in 2 parts, half upon signing, half after the term ends." The air disappeared from the room. "I don't need a love story," he continued. "I need a legally binding union that satisfies my grandfather's conditions. You need financial stability, and your father needs immediate treatment. I believe we can help each other." Claire opened the folder. The legal terms were clear, unemotional. The compensation was real. "This is absurd," she said softly. "Perhaps, but it's also practical. You want me to play house with you for a year? No. I want you to attend functions with me, wear a ring, and keep up appearances. Nothing more. We'll live separately, privately." "Respectfully," Claire stood. "This isn't a favor. This is a transaction." "Yes," Graham said. "A transaction that could save your father's life." The quiet that followed wrapped itself around the room like fog. Claire's voice, when it returned, was barely a whisper. "I need 3 days. You'll have them," he said. But as she walked out of the room, clutching the contract like a grenade, she knew something in her life had already shifted, and it was just beginning. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. 3 days passed like hours. Claire sat alone in the hospital's cafeteria, a lukewarm cup of tea cradled in her hands. The hum of vending machines, the low murmur of nurses swapping shifts, and the squeak of polished shoes against tile. It all blurred into a quiet chaos around her. Her father was resting upstairs, his vitals stable for now, but the oncologist's face during the last check-in had said more than the charts ever could. She stared down at the contract, now worn at the edges from too much handling, legal words. Clean fonts, cold promises. She had one condition of her own. And if he said no, she'd walk. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She didn't hesitate. "Miss Bennett," Graham's voice filled her ear, even through the static. It was always measured. Always too calm. "I have an answer," she said, before he could speak. "I suspected you would. I'll do it." "With terms." There was a pause. "Go on." "I want half the money up front. My father's next treatment round is scheduled in 4 days. I don't want to gamble with your family politics." "Done. I continue my work. I'm not shelving my research for this role. As long as you fulfill your public obligations, your private time is your own." Claire exhaled slowly. "Then we have a deal." There was silence on the line. Then, "My legal team will deliver the documents tonight. Signing can happen tomorrow." "Fine." "And Claire," she froze. He'd never said her name before. "You'll need to practice calling me Graham. No one will believe we're married if you address me like a business associate." Claire hung up without a word. The next morning was humid. Charleston was draped in that peculiar southern haze, half sun, half storm. Claire stood in front of a mirror in the courthouse bathroom, her hair pulled back, a simple white blouse tucked into a navy skirt, nothing bridal, nothing sentimental. The ceremony lasted under 10 minutes. Graham stood beside her in a charcoal suit, crisp and emotionless. The judge, an old friend of the Langford family, read the vows like a grocery list. Claire repeated the words, her voice steady, while her mind flickered to her father, asleep in a hospital bed he might never leave. Graham slid a platinum band onto her finger. It was heavy. Cool. Meaningless. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Graham didn't reach for her hand. He simply nodded once, like a man concluding a business negotiation. "The car will take you to the estate," he said as they walked out into the Charleston heat. "Mrs. Delaney will help you settle in." "And you?" Claire asked, almost reflexively. "I have meetings." "Of course." The black car was silent inside, the driver polite but distant. Claire stared out the window as they pulled into the Langford estate. She was now a wife to a man she barely knew and bound to a family she didn't trust. Mrs. Delaney met her at the door, petite and sharp-eyed, with silver hair swept into a bun and a gaze that saw everything without blinking. "Welcome to Langford House, Mrs. Langford," she said. Claire stiffened. Claire is fine. Of course. The house was more of a museum than a home. High ceilings, mahogany walls, the scent of lemon polish and old books. It was beautiful. Cold, immaculate, Mrs. Delaney led her down a long corridor toward the east wing. "Your suite is here, Mr. Langford occupies the west wing." Of course he did. Claire stepped into the room and gasped, quietly, but still, the suite was twice the size of her apartment. Cream-colored bedding, a writing desk beside a bay window, a private bathroom with marble counters, and a closet filled with designer clothes already in her size. She opened the closet door and let out a dry laugh. "I didn't agree to a wardrobe upgrade," she said, mostly to herself. "You agreed to be convincing," Mrs. Delaney replied, folding a towel with perfect symmetry. "A Langford wife cannot wear department store sales racks." Claire turned to her. "Do you approve of this arrangement?" Mrs. Delaney didn't flinch. "Approval is above my station. I'm here to see things run smoothly." And with that, she was gone. That night, Claire dined alone in the formal dining room. The table could seat 20. The butler served dishes she couldn't pronounce, each more beautiful and less appetizing than the last. She didn't touch her wine. She didn't sleep either. Around midnight, Claire wandered the hallways barefoot, the silence oppressive. The house creaked in its own language. Portraits of dead Langfords lined the walls, stern faces, sharp eyes, none of them smiling. She found herself in the library without knowing how she got there. The lights were on. Graham was seated in an armchair by the fireplace, a book in his lap, unread. Claire froze. "I didn't mean to intrude." "It's your home now," he said, his tone flat. "Technically." "I couldn't sleep." He didn't look up. "It takes time to adjust." She took a tentative step inside. "Were you close to your grandfather?" Graham's expression shifted. "Barely, but enough. He raised me after my parents died." "He was exacting." "And your brother?" Graham's gaze lifted, sharp. "Not a topic I care to discuss." Claire crossed the room slowly. "We have to convince the world we're in love, Graham. Maybe we should at least get to know each other." That was the first time she saw him smirk. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was something. "We have our first appearance tomorrow. A fundraiser at the harbor. Be ready by 6. Claire nodded. "Should I wear diamonds or just look expensive?" "Both." She turned to leave, then paused. "I didn't marry you for the money." "I know," Graham said. "You married me for survival, so did I." The next morning, the ring on her finger felt heavier than ever. But the weight wasn't from gold. It was from everything she hadn't said yet. The Langford Foundation Gala was everything Claire imagined a high society event would be, gilded, extravagant, and painfully curated. Held in a waterfront ballroom that overlooked the Charleston harbor, it shimmered under soft amber lights and chandeliers strung with glass crystals. Live jazz floated through the air, and waiters glided between guests with champagne and hors d'oeuvres balanced on silver trays. The scent of gardenia lingered, subtle and deliberate. Nothing here was accidental. Claire stood at the top of the grand staircase in a midnight blue gown that clung to her frame like it had been sewn onto her skin. Her hair was pinned back in soft waves, and around her neck sat a strand of pearls she hadn't asked for, but that Graham's assistant, Rebecca, had assured her were non-negotiable. "You're not a guest. You're a Langford now," she'd said, not unkindly, but with the finality of someone who didn't waste words. From the foot of the stairs, Graham looked up and saw her. He didn't smile. That would have been too generous, but something in his posture shifted. A stillness. "You clean up well," he said as she descended. "And you clean up exactly as expected," Claire replied, trying not to trip over her heels or the moment. Graham's tuxedo was flawless, his tie knotted so precisely it almost looked effortless. Almost. He offered his arm. She hesitated, then slipped hers through it. "Ready?" he asked, quietly enough that only she could hear. "No," she whispered. But here we are. They stepped into the ballroom like a photograph coming to life. Poised, composed, practiced. Claire could feel eyes on them instantly. Curious, assessing. Some warm, some calculating. "Who are they?" someone murmured behind a champagne flute. "That's his new wife, the scientist." "Scientist? I heard she used to be a nurse." "No, she's one of those medical researchers. DNA stuff." Weird match, isn't it? Claire's spine stiffened, but her smile didn't falter. She kept her gaze on Graham, who leaned in ever so slightly. "They're already writing your biography," he said under his breath. She smiled sweetly at a passing couple. "Let them. I hope someone gives me a scandalous nickname." He raised a brow. "You don't scare easily, do you?" "I'm too tired to be scared." They approached a cluster of donors near the auction table. Graham slid seamlessly into conversation, his tone cool but gracious. Claire stood beside him, nodding when appropriate, answering questions about her research when prompted. She felt like a curated exhibit, just enough depth to intrigue, not enough to complicate. After a while, she excused herself and slipped out onto the terrace. The harbor glistened under moonlight. Boats swayed gently. It was quieter here, the music muffled behind glass doors. "Escaping already?" a voice asked behind her. She turned to find a man in a navy suit, tie loosened, eyes sharp. He held a half-empty glass of bourbon. "Just taking a breath," she replied cautiously. "Smart. It gets suffocating in there." He extended a hand. "Elliot Langford, brother of the groom." Claire hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was light, but his gaze was heavy, too curious. Too knowing. "Claire Bennett, or Langford, I suppose. Big night for you. Is it?" Elliot chuckled. "Touché. Most people would be wide-eyed. You're calm. I've spent the last 5 years in labs and hospitals. Rich people sipping $300 whiskey doesn't intimidate me." "Fair enough." He sipped. "So what's your angle?" Claire's head tilted slightly. "Excuse me? You're brilliant. Accomplished. You don't need to marry into the Langford dynasty to matter. So, why him?" There it was. Not whispered behind fans or passed between wine glasses, said out loud. She answered without blinking. "Why do you think it has to be an angle?" Elliot smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Because I know my brother, and I know this. Marriage wasn't born out of moonlight and violins." Claire didn't flinch. "You're right. It was born out of desperation. Mine. His. Pick one. He studied her. You're sharper than I expected. And you're more transparent than you think. A pause. Then Elliot laughed, tipping his glass in her direction. You're going to be fun to watch. Don't count on it. She turned and walked back inside, her heart pounding harder than it should have. Graham found her near the silent auction display. Elliot spoke to you, he said. Not a question. Briefly. He nodded. What did he say? Asked me my angle. And what did you say? That I had none. They were quiet for a beat. He's not entirely wrong, Graham said. About me or about us? Both. Claire looked up at him, the chandelier's glow catching in her eyes. So why me, Graham? Really? His jaw tightened slightly. You're intelligent, educated, disciplined. You don't scare easily, and you have more to lose than I do. That's not a compliment. It's not meant to be. The sting of it settled between them like smoke. Claire turned to leave, but he caught her wrist gently. Not possessively, but enough to make her pause. I didn't mean to insult you, he said. I just don't sugarcoat things. Maybe you should learn, she replied softly. You're not just playing a part anymore. You're sharing a stage. Later that night, Claire stood alone in her suite, barefoot, her dress unzipped halfway. She stared at the ring on her finger. Heavy, cold. She thought of her father, of the nurse's quiet smile when she'd visited earlier that day and whispered, "He's resting easier." Like something shifted. She thought of Graham, of the moment his fingers brushed hers on the terrace, however briefly, and the warmth it left. Then she thought of Elliot, watching from the shadows, waiting. She slid the ring off and placed it on the dresser. But she didn't walk away from it. Not yet. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Rain drizzled down the windows of the Langford estate, soft and steady, the kind that blurred the outside world into watercolor. Claire sat at the bay window in her suite, legs folded beneath her, a tablet in her lap filled with patient trial data. But her eyes hadn't moved from the same screen in 10 minutes. Her thoughts kept circling back to the gala, to the weight of Graham's hand on her wrist, to Elliot's sharp gaze and veiled insinuations, to the moment she'd taken off the ring and set it down like it meant nothing, only to stare at it for the next hour, unable to turn away. She ran her fingers along the edge of the tablet, then looked toward the clock. Nearly noon. She hadn't seen Graham since the event 2 nights ago. Mrs. Delaney mentioned he'd been out at early meetings and had come back late both evenings. Claire hadn't asked. She wouldn't give anyone, especially herself, the satisfaction of sounding like a curious wife. Still, she found herself drifting toward the West Wing. The halls were quiet. Even the paintings on the walls seemed to watch her pass with disapproval. She paused at the tall double doors to his study and knocked once. Nothing. She was about to turn back when she heard his voice, low and distracted. "Come in." She opened the door slowly. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn, casting the space in cool blue shadows. Graham was seated behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows. A medical file lay open before him. She recognized the scan immediately. Spinal deterioration, neurodegenerative patterns. Her throat tightened. "You're looking at your own file," she said gently. Graham didn't look up. "I review it once a week. It helps me remember what I'm racing against." Claire stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You should be focused on treatment, not self-diagnosing from printouts." He leaned back, finally meeting her gaze. Spoken like a researcher. Spoken like someone who doesn't want to watch a man waste time he doesn't have. A pause stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Graham stood slowly. "I saw the note from your lab director. Your funding extension was denied." Claire blinked. "How do you know that?" "I have contacts at the institute." "You're brilliant, Claire, but brilliance doesn't always keep the lights on." She crossed her arms. "Is that your way of offering me more money?" "No," he said. "It's my way of offering you access." "To what?" "To the Langford Biomedical Grant. Quietly. Privately. No press. You submit a proposal, and we fund your research through an anonymous channel." Her jaw tightened. "So you want to control my work now? I want to help you succeed. You want to own something else about me." That landed harder than she expected. Graham's face shifted, only slightly, but she saw it. The flicker of wounded pride, or maybe regret. "I'll have my assistant forward the details," he said quietly. She stepped closer. "I'm not here for your money." "I know." "Then why does it feel like you keep testing that?" He said nothing. Just returned to his chair and closed the file. Claire turned to leave, but just as her hand reached the doorknob, he spoke again, so softly, she almost missed it. "I didn't ask you to marry me to save the company." She froze. Graham looked at the floor. "That's what everyone thinks. What Elliot assumes, what the board whispers, but that's not the whole truth." Claire turned back. "Then what is?" He took a moment, a breath. "When I was told I might not live past 40, the only thing I could think about was how empty my legacy was. Not just the company, me, my life. The relationships I never built, the love I never allowed myself to feel." She didn't move. "I didn't know how to find something real. So I negotiated something controlled, something that wouldn't hurt. But you—" He looked at her now, and his voice cracked just slightly. "You complicate everything." Claire's throat tightened. She hadn't prepared for this. She'd braced for coldness, for strategy. Not this honesty. "I'm not your answer," she said softly. "I don't want an answer. I want a beginning." Their eyes locked, long enough that the air seemed to shift around them. Then a knock at the door shattered it. Mrs. Delaney peeked in, composed as always. "Apologies." "Mr. Langford, the board is on the line. They're waiting for your vote on the merger clause." Graham nodded, but his gaze didn't leave Claire. "Tell them I'll be 5 minutes." Mrs. Delaney nodded and closed the door. Claire stepped back. "You should go." He didn't move. "You should go," she said again, this time more gently. He nodded. As she turned to leave, Graham's voice stopped her one last time. "Claire." She looked over her shoulder. "I don't regret asking you." She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer. "I just haven't decided if I regret saying yes." Back in her room, Claire sat on the edge of the bed, the rain still whispering at the window. She picked up the ring from the dresser and slid it back onto her finger. Not because she had to, but because it no longer felt quite so heavy. The Langford Garden Party was an annual tradition, an elegant charade dressed in Southern hospitality. The estate's back lawn had been transformed into a picturesque display of wealth and charm. White tents lined with strings of lights, manicured hedges trimmed with obsessive precision, and waiters weaving through clusters of Charleston's most polished elite. Claire stood near a stone fountain surrounded by blooming hydrangeas, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. The dress she'd chosen was soft green, simple but flattering, the neckline modest, the fabric falling just right over her frame. She had spent too long debating it, then hated herself for caring what Graham might think when he saw her. He hadn't arrived yet. Neither had Rosalind Langford. Claire had been warned. Rosalind always made an entrance. "Mrs. Langford," a voice behind her called, too cheerfully. Claire turned to find Rebecca, Graham's executive assistant, striding toward her in heels too narrow for walking on grass. She looked as if she'd stepped out of a boutique window, sharp suit, hair swept back into a perfect twist. "Enjoying the scenery?" Rebecca asked, offering a smile that hovered between warm and performative. Claire nodded. "Trying to memorize the names of the people I'm supposed to impress." Rebecca laughed, but there was something in her eyes, something Claire couldn't quite place. "They'll be more interested in the ring than your resume. It's how this crowd measures value." Claire glanced down at her hand. The ring still felt foreign, beautiful, but undeserved. "Good thing I didn't bring my publications list." Rebecca leaned in, lowering her voice. "Just be careful. Charleston society has a long memory and a short attention span. You're a curiosity right now. That'll turn." Before Claire could respond, a hush fell across the garden. Graham had arrived. He moved through the crowd with the effortless confidence of someone who knew every gaze was on him and had learned to use it. His suit was lighter today, ivory with soft gray accents. Clean. Intentional. His eyes found Claire's almost instantly. She held his gaze, steady and unreadable. He came to stand beside her, greeting a few passing guests before offering her a quiet nod. "You clean up well," she said softly. "You're still using my own line against me. Only because it works." He smiled, just enough for her to see the corners of his mouth move. The tension between them felt different now, not colder, just charged. Before anything more could pass between them, another voice cut through the space, like a breeze laced with ice. "Well, so this is her." Rosalind Langford stood tall, her posture regal, her cane tucked beneath one arm, though she didn't seem to need it. Her pearl-gray dress shimmered in the sunlight, understated and exquisite. The matriarch of the Langford name, widow of the founder, and still a board member with full voting power. Claire turned to face her. "Mrs. Langford," she said, offering her hand. Rosalind didn't take it. She studied her instead, eyes sweeping over Claire from head to toe, then landing firmly on her eyes. "You're not what I expected." "I've heard that before," Claire replied, letting her hand fall to her side. "Your background is unusual." "I'd say the same about this family." Rosalind's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite disapproval. Something in between. "Well," she said, glancing at Graham, "you've always had an eye for disruption." "Claire's not a disruption," Graham said calmly. "She's certainly not decorative," Rosalind replied, looking back at Claire, "which means she'll need to prove her value in other ways." Claire's spine stiffened. "I wasn't aware I was under review." "Oh, my dear, everyone is. Especially those who marry into legacy." "Rosalind," Graham warned, his voice low, even, but Claire didn't flinch. "I understand scrutiny. I've spent my entire career trying to convince grant boards that my research deserved funding. I'm not afraid of being evaluated." Rosalind raised an eyebrow. "We'll see." Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "She always like that?" she muttered. "She was kind," Graham said. "For her." Claire let out a small laugh, surprised. "That was kind?" You should have seen her with Elliot's last girlfriend. I can imagine. Their eyes met again, and something in the air softened. For a moment, just a moment, the party felt far away. You handled her well, Graham said, tilting his head. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not. But there was something in his tone. Admiration. Maybe even pride. Come with me, he said suddenly. Claire blinked. Where? Trust me. He led her around the far end of the tent, past the catering tables, and down a narrow garden path. They emerged into a small, secluded courtyard she hadn't seen before, stone benches, a bubbling fountain, jasmine climbing the walls. It smelled like memory. Graham sat on the bench and gestured for her to do the same. She hesitated, then joined him. This is where I used to hide as a kid, he said quietly. When the parties got too loud, when my father got too proud. Claire didn't speak. He looked out at the fountain. I hated these events, still do, but they matter. Legacy doesn't just live in a company. It lives in perception. And is that what I am? She asked. Perception management? He turned to her slowly. No, that's what I wanted you to be. What I told myself you'd be. Safe, useful, temporary. She held her breath. But then you opened your mouth and didn't care who you were talking to. Then you looked my grandmother in the eye and refused to flinch. And now, I'm starting to forget where the line is between convenience and something else. Claire looked away, heart pounding. You're not allowed to say things like that, she whispered. Why not? Because I need to know where the walls are. And every time I think I've found them, you move them. He leaned in, just enough for his voice to reach her ear. Maybe the walls were never real. Claire stood, suddenly overwhelmed. I should get back, she said. People will notice. He didn't stop her. Just nodded. As she turned to leave, he called out softly, Claire. She paused. You looked beautiful tonight. She didn't answer, but her hands were shaking when she walked away. Claire's heels echoed softly against the marble floor as she made her way through the quiet East Wing hallway. The garden party had ended hours ago, but the night's conversations lingered in her mind like fog that wouldn't lift. She'd barely spoken during the ride back to the estate. Graham had sat beside her, close enough that his cologne clung to the fabric of her dress long after she'd changed out of it. But neither of them had said a word. Not after the courtyard. Not after what he said. Not after the way it made her feel. She stepped into her suite, pulled the pins from her hair, and watched her reflection as her curls tumbled free. For a moment, she just stood there, watching herself, not recognizing the woman staring back. A knock. She turned, surprised. It was almost midnight. Another knock, firmer. Claire pulled the door open slowly. Mrs. Delaney stood on the other side, a robe tied around her waist and reading glasses still perched on her nose. Her gray hair was slightly tousled, as though she'd just left a book half read. Forgive the hour, she said gently, but there's something you should see. Claire blinked. Is something wrong? Not yet, but it could be, Mrs. Delaney turned, leading her down the corridor, not toward the West Wing, but down a narrower hallway Claire had never noticed before. They passed the kitchen, then a door hidden behind a linen curtain. Inside was a small, windowless office, lined with storage cabinets. A computer screen glowed softly on the desk. Mr. Langford often forgets to log out, Mrs. Delaney said, stepping aside. Claire frowned. Why are you showing me this? Because you asked the right question tonight. And I think you deserve a real answer. Claire sat down slowly, and turned the monitor toward her. On the screen was a list of medical files, confidential. Internal. One was open. Graham's latest neurological report. She scrolled through it. The tremors were worsening. The treatment protocol had been paused, dosages adjusted. Side effects severe. Notes from a private specialist in New York hinted at early cognitive decline. Claire's throat went dry. "He's hiding this," she whispered. Mrs. Delaney nodded, arms folded gently over her chest. "He's always been proud. Too proud. But this, he thinks if no one sees the fall, it's not real." Claire stared at the final line on the report. "Recommend immediate escalation to palliative care pathway if condition deteriorates beyond response threshold." "He's dying faster than he told me," Claire murmured. "Yes, Mrs. Delaney said softly. "And he doesn't think you'll stay if you know." Claire's hands trembled slightly as she closed the file. "Thank you for showing me. I didn't do it for him. Or even for you." Mrs. Delaney stepped forward. "I did it for the little girl I lost once. My daughter. She married a man who kept too many secrets. And by the time she knew the truth, there was nothing left to fix." Claire looked up, and for the first time since entering this house, she felt something shift, something ancient, maternal, unspoken. "I'm not going to run," she said quietly. "I didn't think you would," Mrs. Delaney replied, then turned and left, leaving the door half open behind her. Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between her thoughts. The next morning, she was up before sunrise, already dressed, pacing the library by the time Graham walked in with coffee in hand. He paused when he saw her. "You're up early." "I know everything," she said softly. He froze. "Your scans. The failed treatments. The paused protocols. I saw them." Graham set his cup down slowly. "Who showed you?" "It doesn't matter." "I think it does." Claire stepped closer, her voice shaking but firm. "You made me believe this was mutual survival. Business. Strategy. But this is more than that, isn't it? You didn't just want to protect the company. You wanted someone to witness the fall and pretend it wasn't happening." He looked away. "You should have told me," she said. "What would you have done?" he asked, his voice low. "Backed out? Told me I was insane for offering you a contract instead of a goodbye? I would have told you that you didn't have to pretend you weren't scared." Silence. "I'm used to being alone in this," Graham said finally. "And I thought, if I could keep control of the terms, maybe I wouldn't feel like I was disappearing." Claire swallowed hard. "You're not disappearing." He looked at her, eyes tired but sharp. "I am. Just slowly enough that I get to watch it happen." Her chest ached. "Let me help. I don't want your pity." "This isn't pity," she snapped, voice rising. "It's honesty. It's care. It's a woman standing in front of the man she married and saying, 'I see you. Even the parts you're afraid to show.'" He closed his eyes, jaw clenched. "Let me call my contacts," she said, softer now. "There's a clinical trial in Atlanta. It's a new treatment. Promising. But they don't take high-profile patients without a back channel. You'd do that. I already did. They'll talk to you, if you're willing." Graham opened his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Claire stepped closer. "Because I don't want to watch you die pretending you don't matter." The words hit hard. She could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, how his breath caught in his throat. And then, for the first time since the day she arrived, Graham reached for her hand. He didn't say thank you. He didn't offer promises. He just held on. as if finally he knew he wasn't alone. The Langford estate was unusually still. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, like the house itself was holding its breath. Claire sat on the back veranda, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, the early evening breeze threading through the trees. Fireflies blinked over the garden lawn in slow, hypnotic rhythms. Her laptop was open on the table beside her, filled with data charts and trial summaries from the Atlanta clinic, but she hadn't scrolled in 20 minutes. Graham hadn't spoken much since agreeing to the meeting. He hadn't needed to. Something between them had shifted, and though neither of them had named it, the air was different now. Less transactional, more tentative, as though emotion had finally seeped through the cracks they'd both carefully maintained. She looked up as the door behind her opened. Graham stepped outside, his blazer draped over one arm, a crisp dress shirt rolled to his elbows. The evening light softened him, made him look less like a CEO and more like a man trying to remember how to exist outside boardrooms and bottom lines. "I didn't know you were out here," he said. "I wasn't planning to be. I just needed air." He nodded, stepped forward, then hesitated. "May I?" Claire gestured to the chair beside her. "It's your house." "It doesn't feel like mine lately," he admitted as he sat down. "Sometimes I walk past my own reflection and don't recognize the man looking back." She turned to him, quiet for a beat. "I think we all go through that." Graham looked out toward the hedges, his voice lower now. "I had a plan. Years ago, I'd take the company global, double revenue, buy out the board by 45. Then, maybe I'd think about a family. If it fit." Claire smiled faintly. "And then, your body betrayed the timeline." He glanced at her, surprised by the bluntness, then gave a slow nod. "Exactly." They sat in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just heavy. "When's your consultation in Atlanta?" she asked. "Thursday, midday." "I can go with you," she offered quickly, almost too quickly. Graham's brow lifted slightly. "You don't have to." "I know, but you want to." She didn't look away. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Then I'd like that." Claire exhaled, letting her shoulders drop for the first time in hours. "I've already briefed Dr. Lefebvre on your charts. She's familiar with the spinal strain pattern in your scans. She thinks you might qualify for Tier 2 candidacy." "I Googled her," Graham admitted. "She's been published 16 times. "That's more than me." Claire smiled. "That's how you measure people? Publication count?" "I'm trying to learn your language." They laughed, and for a moment, the space between them felt light again. "Familiar." Then his expression shifted. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "Depends on how personal." "Your mother. What happened to her?" Claire's hands folded over one another in her lap. "She was diagnosed with the same genetic condition my father has now. Early onset. Degenerative. She lost motor control in less than a year." Speech went next. "By the time she passed, I was 16. I'd already memorized every dosage, every appointment, every symptom." Graham's voice softened. "That's why you became a researcher." "I wanted to feel like I could control something, like I could save someone next time." He was quiet, then said, "You've been saving me since the day we met. I just didn't know it." Claire's eyes found his. He wasn't smiling. He meant it. Before she could reply, the veranda door opened again. "Elliot." "Of course." He stepped out, a glass of wine in one hand, casual as ever. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a grin that never reached his eyes. You are, Graham replied, not looking at him. Elliot ignored it. Lovely evening. You two look settled. Claire stiffened. Elliot glanced between them. I heard about the Atlanta trip. Word travels fast when Rosalind has ears in every clinic. Graham's jaw tightened. Not your business. Everything Langford is my business, brother. Especially when it comes with potential PR consequences. Claire stood, her voice firm. You can leave now. Elliot's grin widened. Didn't realize you were handing out orders in this house. She's my wife, Graham cut in, rising. She speaks with my authority. That landed. Elliot's expression shifted, briefly, but enough. He took a slow sip from his glass, then nodded. Well, enjoy the stars, lovebirds. As he disappeared inside, Claire exhaled. He always like that? Graham shook his head. Only when he's being polite. They sat again, a little closer this time. The fireflies still blinked. The night pressed around them, still and warm. I meant what I said, Graham said after a while. About you saving me. Claire looked at him, steady. Then let me keep trying. And he didn't answer. He just reached for her hand again. And this time, she didn't let go. The private plane hummed quietly as it soared over the South Carolina coast, cutting through pale clouds on its way to Atlanta. Claire sat across from Graham, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though her fingers betrayed her calm, tapping lightly, rhythmically, against the side of her thigh. Graham watched her for a moment before speaking. You're more nervous than I expected. She glanced up. I'm not nervous about the flight. No. You're thinking about the trial. I'm thinking about everything, she admitted. The protocol, the risks, the what-ifs, and you. Graham leaned back in his seat, arms relaxed, but eyes alert. I've already prepared myself for a no. Claire's tone sharpened slightly. Then prepare for a yes. You're not walking into that hospital to surrender. You're going to fight. There was silence between them, charged and still. Then he asked, And if I can't fight much longer? She met his gaze directly. Then we still don't waste the time we have. The plane banked gently as it began its descent, city lights blinking beneath them like scattered stars. Claire looked out the window, but her reflection in the glass was what held her attention. She didn't recognize this version of herself, so full of worry, but so fiercely attached. At the clinic, everything was smooth, clinical, rehearsed. Claire had walked these halls before, in other lives, with other patients. But today felt different. Dr. Lefebvre greeted them with a quiet smile and a clipboard of intake forms. Mr. Langford, Claire. Come with me. The consultation lasted 90 minutes. Most of it was numbers, charts, references to published studies and drug regimens that hadn't yet reached public knowledge. Claire tracked every word, every number, occasionally exchanging quick glances with the doctor. Tiny nods, affirmations, confirmations that Graham didn't always catch. But when Dr. Lefebvre finally closed the file and looked up, her voice gentled. You qualify. Not as a primary candidate, but you're a fit for Tier 2. The treatment will be aggressive. The side effects are difficult. But we've had success in slowing the progression. Graham exhaled, slow and quiet. Claire's hand found his under the table, fingers tightening. What's the timeline? He asked. We begin next week. 2 months of observation, 4 months of treatment. Full protocol. If you choose to proceed, you'll need to stay in Atlanta for the first phase. Graham turned to Claire. And the estate? We'll manage, she said. You'll do what you need to do. But something flickered behind his eyes. Doubt. Maybe fear. Later, as they exited the clinic into the amber wash of the setting sun, Graham was quiet. Claire didn't push, not until they reached the waiting car. Only once they were seated did she ask, "You're not backing out, are you?" He didn't answer immediately. "I never planned to actually get this far," he said finally. "It always felt like, if I kept moving, kept working, I could outrun it. The moment I stop, it's real." Claire turned toward him. "So you're scared?" He didn't deny it. She reached for his hand again. "That makes two of us." The hotel suite that night was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows, soft linens, understated luxury. But Claire found herself pacing the room as Graham changed out of his shirt, unhurried, unaware of how many times she glanced toward the door. She caught herself watching him in the mirror, his bare back lined with subtle muscle and shadows, his posture steady, but not unshaken. "I never asked you," she said suddenly. "Why did you choose me?" He turned, pulling on a clean shirt, but didn't button it yet. "For the marriage?" She nodded. Graham crossed the room, stopping just in front of her. The air between them thickened. "I didn't want someone who'd say yes too easily. I wanted someone who'd argue with me, make me uncomfortable, call me out when I deserved it. And yet, you've been trying to manage me from the beginning." "Habit," he admitted. "I'm used to people who follow. You don't." Claire's voice was softer now. "So you chose resistance. I chose someone who reminded me what it feels like to be human." They stood there, inches apart, neither moving. Then Claire whispered, "We're supposed to be pretending, remember?" "I'm done pretending," he said. The kiss happened quietly. No urgency, no performance. Just two people who had run out of reasons not to reach for each other. When their lips met, it was slow, careful, like they were both afraid of shattering something delicate. And then something broke open. Graham pulled her closer, hands at her waist, grounding himself in her presence. Claire leaned into him, fingers curled into his shirt. It wasn't passion for the sake of relief. It was connection. Messy, raw, real. When they pulled apart, neither of them spoke for a long moment. Graham's forehead rested gently against hers. "We've crossed a line." Claire's breath was still shaky. "I think we were always meant to." He looked at her then, eyes searching. "So what now?" She answered without hesitation. "Now we stop running." And for the first time since he'd said "I do," Graham Langford looked like a man who wanted to live. It rained the morning they returned to Charleston. A soft, steady drizzle that painted the Langford estate in silvery light and made the gardens smell like damp earth and jasmine. Claire sat by the parlor window, a cup of coffee cooling beside her, watching as droplets traced lines down the glass. Everything felt different. The air between her and Graham held a quiet intimacy now, unspoken but unmistakable. They had crossed a line in Atlanta, one they hadn't dared acknowledge yet in words. But their silences said enough. She touched her lips without thinking, remembering the feel of his kiss, the steadiness of his hands. The way he had looked at her, not like an accessory or a calculated choice, but like a man seeing something real for the first time in a very long time. The door creaked open behind her. "I figured I'd find you here," Graham said, his voice rough with mourning. Claire glanced over her shoulder. "I'm predictable now?" He stepped in, hair still damp from a shower, sleeves pushed up, no tie. "You always chase the light." She smiled faintly. "Some days it feels like the only thing worth chasing." He came to stand beside her, his gaze following the rain outside. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." Claire didn't ask what. She didn't have to. She whispered, Neither have I. But before the moment could settle, a knock sounded at the parlor door. Mrs. Delaney stepped in, envelope in hand. "This came for you, Claire. It's from the Institute." Claire took it, her fingers tense before she even opened it. Her research proposal. She'd resubmitted it under the Langford Biomedical Grant last week, refining it after Atlanta with Dr. Lefebvre's notes in mind. She broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the letter, and her breath caught. Then slowly her shoulders dropped. "It was accepted," she said softly. "Fully funded." "Immediate approval." Graham smiled. "That's incredible." Claire blinked down at the page. "I should be thrilled." "You don't sound thrilled." She hesitated, then looked at him. "Because I know I didn't get it on merit alone. I got it because your name was tied to it. You earned it." "I used you to earn it," she said, standing now, pacing. "And I'm not sure where that leaves me." He stepped forward, voice low. "It leaves you right where you've always been, fighting for something that matters. But how much of this," she motioned to the room, to them, "is real? And how much is convenience dressed in emotion?" Graham's brow furrowed. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know," Claire snapped. "Maybe I'm losing track of what's real and what's strategic. Maybe that's the problem when you start with a contract instead of a choice." The silence that followed was thick. Then, from the doorway, another voice cut in. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Claire turned to see Elliot leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a familiar smirk dancing at the corners of his mouth. "Always," Graham muttered. Elliot stepped in, too casual, too confident. "I happened to be at the Institute this morning," ran into Dr. Singh. "He mentioned your proposal, Claire. Congratulations." Claire narrowed her eyes. "You don't believe in congratulations." "True," Elliot said, "but I do believe in reading between the lines." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to Graham. Graham unfolded it slowly. His face darkened as his eyes moved across the page. "What is this?" Claire asked, stepping closer. Elliot answered for him. "An internal memo from 3 months ago. You submitted a funding request for a study on neurodegenerative inheritance patterns using a sample set of anonymized Langford scans." Claire froze. "I pulled the records," Elliot went on, casually. "Turns out you'd been studying Graham's condition before you ever met him, before the contract, before the marriage." Graham's voice was cold now. "Is that true?" Claire looked at him, stricken. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," he said, eyes hardening, "because it looks like you targeted me." "No," she said quickly. "I was researching rare conditions. Your scan came through anonymized, flagged by a colleague. I didn't even know it was yours until weeks later, long after the contract." "But you didn't tell me," Graham said. "Not when I offered the deal. Not when I gave you access to everything. You hid it." "I didn't hide it," she whispered. "I didn't know how. You knew enough to keep quiet." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Well, this is more entertaining than I expected." "Get out," Graham snapped, his voice like stone. Elliot held up his hands. "Don't shoot the messenger. Just trying to keep things transparent." He turned and left, his smirk lingering long after he disappeared. Claire looked at Graham, her voice shaking. "I wasn't using you. I was trying to understand the disease that killed my mother." "That's all it was. I never expected you to become this." He didn't speak. "Please say something," she begged. But Graham only stared at her, not with hatred, not even anger. With distance, the kind that made her heart drop. "I need time," he said finally, quietly. Claire stood there as he walked past her, his footsteps fading down the corridor, and she realized that the hardest part of falling in love without meaning to was not knowing when the fall had become real. Claire left the Langford estate the next morning before sunrise. No dramatic goodbye, no suitcase packed with hesitation, just her laptop, a duffel bag of essentials, and a quiet note left on Graham's nightstand that said only, "I never lied. I just didn't know how to tell the truth without losing everything." The town car pulled away as the first light broke over the marshland. The gravel crunched beneath the tires like an afterthought, leaving only the sound of cicadas and silence behind. She didn't go back to her apartment in town. Instead, she checked into a quiet rental on James Island, a place she'd used for writing grant proposals and hiding from the noise of the world when she needed to breathe. The house smelled faintly of cedar and sea salt, and the air inside felt like pause, like waiting. Claire didn't cry. She worked. She buried herself in clinical files, trial frameworks, and early reports from Atlanta. The research was solid. The funding was real. Her project was moving forward, whether or not her marriage was. But even as she typed late into the night, even as data filled her screen, Graham's voice kept echoing in her mind, the way he'd said, "You knew enough to keep quiet." Like her silence had undone everything they'd built. And maybe it had. 3 days passed. Then 4. On the 5th, Dr. Ruiz showed up unannounced. Claire opened the door and blinked in surprise. "How did you find me?" "GPS," Lena said, holding up her phone. "And desperation. Yours and mine." Claire stepped aside. "I don't need a lecture." "Good," Lena said, slipping off her raincoat. "Because I didn't bring one. I brought wine and questions." Claire let out a weak laugh. "God, I missed you." "I know." They sat on the worn leather sofa, wine glasses full but untouched. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, the kind of rain that didn't demand attention but refused to be ignored. "He's not speaking to me," Claire said finally. "He's hurt," Lena replied. "But that doesn't mean he's stopped feeling everything else." Claire's voice cracked. "What if it's too late?" "Claire," Lena said gently, "I've known you 10 years. You're the most precise person I've ever met. You measure risk like it's second nature. But this is the first time I've seen you terrified to fight." Claire swallowed hard. "Because this fight, if I lose him, I lose more than love. I lose what I never thought I'd have in the first place. A place, a person, a family." Lena reached over, took her hand. "Then go remind him why you were worth the risk." Claire shook her head. "He asked for space, and you gave it. Now give him the truth." The next morning, Claire drove back to the estate. She wasn't sure what she expected. The gates to be locked, maybe. Or Mrs. Delaney to meet her with a solemn shake of the head. Instead, the house looked the same. But it felt emptier. She stepped inside quietly, her footsteps softened by the rugs, her breath catching in her throat as memories tugged at her from every corner. The grand piano in the parlor, the smell of Graham's cologne in the hallway, the faint imprint of her laugh still hanging in the air. She found Mrs. Delaney in the kitchen, slicing fruit with practiced precision. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome back," Claire said softly. Mrs. Delaney didn't look up. "This house has held a lot worse than a wounded heart." Claire stepped forward. "How is he?" Silent, distant, like he's trying not to feel anything. Claire's eyes welled, but she blinked quickly. "May I see him?" Mrs. Delaney paused, then nodded toward the west wing. "He's in the study." Claire walked down the hall slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the study, the door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Graham sat behind the desk, papers scattered before him, his posture rigid, his eyes unreadable. He didn't look up. "I thought you were gone for good," he said. "I almost was," Claire replied, stepping inside. He finally met her gaze. "Why are you here?" "Because I owe you the truth." "All of it." Graham said nothing, just waited. "I started studying your condition before I met you," she said. "That much is true, but I didn't know it was you. I had no idea whose scans they were until months later. By then, I was already working on my grant. When you offered the contract, I thought maybe this was fate, a way to help you. A way to help my father. I didn't realize how personal it would become. You should have told me." "I know," she said, stepping closer. "But I was afraid if you knew how much I needed this research, you'd think I only married you for it." He stared at her. "Did you?" "No," she said, her voice breaking. "I married you to save my father. But I stayed because I started to love the way you looked at the world, even when you were afraid of it. I stayed because you made me feel seen. And then, somewhere in between the pretending and the silence, I fell in love with you." The room was quiet. Claire's breath caught. Graham stood slowly, his eyes locked on hers. "You said fell. Past tense." Her voice shook. "Because I don't know if it still matters to you." He stepped forward. "It matters," he said, "more than I wanted it to." She held her breath. "And that's what scared me," he continued. "You came into my life like a storm I didn't see coming. And suddenly everything I thought I could control slipped away." Claire looked up at him, eyes full. "So what now?" Graham reached into his desk drawer and pulled out her note. He unfolded it carefully, the paper creased and worn. "I've read this 20 times, he said. "And every time I hoped you'd walk back through that door." She laughed softly through a tear. "Then why did it take me so long?" "Because some truths have to hurt before they heal." And just like that, the distance broke. He stepped into her arms, and she into his. And for the first time in weeks, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was peace. It was a beginning. And this time, there were no contracts. Just the slow, steady rhythm of forgiveness. The letter came on a Monday. No ceremony, no warning. Claire found it tucked between a stack of mail Graham had brought in himself, something he rarely did. She almost missed it. The envelope plain, stamped from the Charleston Pediatric Genetics Center. Her fingers paused when she saw it. Her heart did not. She opened it slowly, scanning the clinical header and lines of medical summary. At first, the words didn't make sense. Then they did. Sadie Bennett. Age, 4 years, 7 months. Preliminary findings indicate presence of rare inherited genetic markers consistent with Langford strain of degenerative disorder. Recommended follow-up. Immediate family consultation and genomic sequencing. Her hands went numb. The room tilted. Claire sat down, and for the first time in a long time, she couldn't breathe. She read it again, then again, each time hoping the words might shift, morph into something easier, something kind. But they didn't. Sadie, her daughter, Graham's daughter, she hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned for her to carry the very thing she had fought so hard to understand, to stop, to undo. Claire had built her career around studying the cruel inheritance that took her mother, that haunted her father, and now it was in the hands of a child who didn't even know her father's name. She couldn't stay seated. She stood, paced, gripped the kitchen counter like it was the only solid thing in the world. The letter trembled in her hands. 5 years ago, Claire had made a choice: leave quietly, protect her daughter, and give her a life free of the Langford name, the Langford expectations, and the Langford legacy of pain. She had told herself it was strength. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was both. The back door opened. "Claire?" Graham's voice, calm as ever. She didn't answer. He stepped into the kitchen, saw her standing there, pale, still, clutching the paper. His expression shifted instantly. "What is it?" She handed it to him without speaking. He read it slowly, his brows tightening. Then his hands lowered, and his eyes found hers. "She's mine." It wasn't a question. Claire's voice barely broke the silence. "Yes." There was no anger, no raised voice, just a quiet devastation. "For how long have you known?" "I suspected a year ago. I had her tested when the signs started showing, just subtle things, nothing dangerous. But now—" Graham sat down. He didn't say a word. Claire dropped into the seat across from him. "I didn't tell you because I thought I was protecting her. From this, from you, from your world. I thought I was sparing her from a life dictated by bloodlines and boardrooms." "You were sparing yourself," he said gently. "Not cruel, just honest." She nodded, tears rising. "Yes, I was afraid if you knew, I'd lose control of her." "Of what kind of life she'd live?" Graham didn't move. "You think I'd take her from you?" "I didn't know," Claire whispered. "Back then, I didn't know the man you'd become. And by the time I did, it felt too late." Graham leaned back, closing his eyes. "You kept my daughter from me." "I did. And now she might be carrying the same thing that's killing me." Claire pressed a fist to her mouth to keep from breaking. He stood slowly, walked to the window, his hand resting against the frame. "When can I meet her?" Claire's voice cracked. "Are you sure that's a good idea right now?" "I've already missed 5 years," he said. "I don't plan to miss another minute." Her eyes filled. "She doesn't know you. She's never even asked about her father. I never let her." "I don't care," he said. "I'll start wherever she is." Claire stood. "I'll bring her tomorrow, to the estate. If she wants to come." He nodded once, then turned. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between grief and wonder. "Claire?" She looked at him. He crossed to her in 2 slow steps and gently took her hand. "I would have loved her either way," he said, "healthy or not. Yours or not. But knowing she's ours, that changes everything." She burst into tears, finally, quietly, without apology. Graham didn't try to stop her. He just pulled her close, and they stood there, 2 parents on the edge of something they didn't yet understand, holding on like it was the only thing left that made sense. That night, Claire drove back to James Island, her hands trembling on the wheel. She found Sadie playing with her dolls in the living room, singing to herself in soft off-key notes that melted something inside her chest. Claire dropped to her knees. "Sweetheart?" she said gently. Sadie turned, wide-eyed, curious. "There's someone I want you to meet," Claire whispered. "Someone important." Sadie blinked. "Is it a doctor?" "No." Claire smiled through tears. "It's your dad." and the words hung in the air like the start of something new, something uncertain, but real. The next day unfolded with a stillness that felt deliberate, like the world was holding its breath. Claire stood at the base of the Langford estate steps, her hand gently wrapped around Sadie's. The child's curls bounced lightly in the breeze, her little sneakers tapping against the stone walkway as she shifted from foot to foot. "Is it a big house?" Sadie asked, squinting up at the towering front door. "It's very big," Claire said, crouching down to meet her eyes. "And there's someone inside who's been waiting a long time to meet you." Sadie tilted her head. "The man you told me about?" Claire nodded. "Yes, his name is Graham." He's your dad." Sadie blinked slowly, the weight of the word sinking in. "Does he look like me?" Claire smiled through a wave of emotion. "Yes." "Especially your eyes." Before Sadie could ask more, the front door opened. Graham stood there, dressed in dark slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled just below his elbows. He looked taller somehow, more solemn than Sadie expected, but his eyes softened the moment he saw her. They just stared at each other. Sadie didn't speak. Neither did he. Claire stood, heart pounding. "Sadie, this is Graham. Graham, this is Sadie." Graham stepped forward slowly, kneeling just a few feet from her. "Hi," he said gently. "It's really, really good to meet you." Sadie blinked again, then took a half step forward. "Mom said you like books." He smiled. "I do." She paused. "Do you like peanut butter?" Graham's brow lifted slightly. "Only if it's crunchy." Sadie grinned. "Me too." And just like that, something fragile cracked open between them. "I have a library," he offered, his voice still careful, "with a window seat. Would you like to see it?" Sadie turned to Claire, who gave a soft nod. The girl looked back to Graham and whispered, "Okay." They walked inside slowly, Graham not reaching for her hand, just walking beside her, letting her choose the distance. Claire followed, her heart pulled in a dozen directions at once. The library was bathed in sunlight, floor-to-ceiling shelves, the scent of old pages and polished wood filling the air. Sadie stepped in, wide-eyed. "Whoa," she breathed. Graham chuckled. That's the right reaction. He walked to one of the lower shelves and pulled out a hardcover with a worn navy cover. "This was my favorite when I was little, about a fox who builds a boat from twigs and sails across the world." Sadie inched closer. "Did he come back?" Graham opened the book to the first page. "He did, but not before learning what he really wanted wasn't across the world. It was the people he left behind." Claire leaned against the doorframe, tears prickling behind her eyes. Later that afternoon, as Sadie curled up in the library's window seat with a pile of picture books and a glass of apple juice, Claire and Graham stood in the hallway just out of earshot. "She's amazing," he said quietly, his eyes still on the child. Claire swallowed. "She's her own galaxy." He nodded slowly. "And I've missed 5 years of it." "You didn't know." "I should have." Claire turned toward him. "We can't change the past, but we can decide what happens now." There was a beat of silence before Graham spoke again. "The board meets next week. Rosalind's pushing for a vote to restructure the family trust. Elliot's been planting rumors, claiming I've lost control. That I fabricated this marriage to delay succession." Claire's stomach twisted. "And Sadie?" "He doesn't know about her yet. But when he does, he'll come after her. Her claim, her name. He'll use her as a pawn unless we're careful." Claire's voice sharpened. Then we don't give him the chance. Graham looked at her. I want to change my will. I want Sadie named as my heir. Officially, publicly. Claire's breath caught. That'll start a war. I know. But she's worth it. And the board? Rosalind? I don't need their blessing. I need yours. Claire was quiet for a long moment. She's never had a father, she said softly. And I've never had to share her with anyone. You wouldn't be sharing her, Graham said. We'd be raising her. Together. The finality in his words broke something in her. The fear, the doubt. The distance they had both spent too long trying to navigate. She looked up at him, eyes full. Then let's do it. And in that moment, they weren't two people repairing something broken. They were three people beginning something new. Something that didn't erase the past, but made peace with it. Something whole. The Langford estate was quieter than usual, though the silence didn't bring peace. It felt like the hush before a storm. Claire sat at the long oak table in Graham's study, reviewing the latest edits to the updated will. Every word had been chosen with care. Sadie's name was written clearly, unmistakably, as the primary heir to Graham's personal trust. It wasn't just legal, it was symbolic. A declaration of truth, of choice, of legacy. She glanced over at Graham, who stood by the window, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. You don't have to do this today, she said gently. Yes, I do. He didn't turn to her. The board's meeting is tomorrow. Elliot's already pushing rumors. If we don't make this official before then, they'll spin it like we're hiding something. Claire folded her hands together. You're giving Sadie more than just your name. Graham turned now, his expression unreadable. She's the only thing I've ever built that I care about keeping. Claire didn't respond. She just stood and crossed the room to him, placing a hand over his. He laced his fingers through hers without hesitation. Then came the knock. They both looked toward the door as Mrs. Delaney peeked in. I'm sorry to interrupt. But Mr. Elliot Langford is here. He insisted. Claire felt Graham's fingers tighten. Send him in, he said calmly. A moment later, Elliot swept into the room like he owned it. Perfectly pressed suit, polished shoes, and that same unsettling grin. Sorry to barge in unannounced, he said, eyes flicking to Claire. Though I suppose surprises are a bit of a family tradition now. What do you want? Graham asked, voice flat. Elliot walked slowly toward the desk, noticing the documents still spread out. Updating your will, I see, he mused. Brave, given the volatile nature of your situation. Claire took a slow breath. Get to the point, Elliot. He smiled, just faintly. I know about the girl. The room shifted. Even the air felt tighter. I got a tip, he continued, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. Clinic records, genetic tests, rather interesting match percentages. Graham's face didn't move. She's my daughter. Your secret daughter, Elliot corrected, who conveniently appeared just in time to secure your legacy. Charming. She's not a move on a chessboard, Claire snapped. She's a child. Elliot leaned on the edge of the desk. A child whose existence rewrites everything in this family. You know the board won't accept this without a fight. Graham stepped forward. I don't care what the board accepts. This is my decision, my name, my legacy. And what about the optics? Elliot pressed. You think the public won't question why you've hidden an heir for 5 years? Why your wife suddenly reappeared with a child whose DNA conveniently saves your corporate skin? Claire's voice was low, measured. We're not hiding anything. We're telling the truth. Elliot chuckled. Truth isn't always enough in this family. Graham's voice hardened. Then let them question it, let them whisper, let them try to claw at it. I'll stand in front of every camera, every board member, and every shareholder and tell them the truth myself. He turned to Claire, and the quiet in his voice carried more weight than any outburst. She's ours, and I'm not asking permission to claim her. Elliot's smirk faltered. Just slightly. You can challenge this, of course, Graham added, but you'll be challenging a father's right to his child. You think that'll play well at the next investor call? For the first time, Elliot hesitated. Then he shrugged, smoothing the lapel of his jacket. Legacy's a messy thing, brother. Don't expect it to go quietly. He turned and left, the door clicking softly behind him. Claire exhaled, shoulders sagging with the release of pressure she hadn't even realized she was holding. Graham walked back to the desk and picked up the pen. No more waiting. He signed the papers with steady hands. Claire watched him, a swell of something rising in her chest. Pride, fear, love, all tangled together. It's done, he said, setting the pen down. She stepped beside him. Are you ready for what's next? Graham looked at her, then toward the hallway where Sadie's laughter echoed faintly from the parlor. I'm not ready, he said softly, but I'm not afraid anymore. Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. Tomorrow would bring the boardroom, the headlines, the questions. But today, they had each other, and that was more than enough. The Langford boardroom was colder than usual, though the temperature hadn't changed. It was the kind of cold that settled in the space between people, born from suspicion, tension, and unfinished sentences. 12 leather chairs encircled a polished mahogany table. At the head sat Rosalind Langford, back straight, her pearl necklace catching the morning light. She said nothing as the last board member took their seat. Claire stood just behind Graham, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but her face didn't betray it. Not here, not now. Graham didn't speak at first. He let the silence hold for a few beats longer than was comfortable. Then finally, his voice cut through. Thank you all for coming. I know there's been discussion. A few eyes shifted toward Elliot, seated at the far end of the table. He offered a thin, polite smile and steepled his fingers. Graham continued. Before we move into votes and motions, I want to make something clear. The rumors are true. I have a daughter. A ripple of quiet surprise swept the room. Not shock, not denial. Just confirmation of what they already suspected but hadn't dared say aloud. Claire looked at Rosalind, who was still unreadable. Graham's voice remained steady. Her name is Sadie. She's 5 years old. She carries the Langford blood. She is my child, and she will inherit my name, my shares, and every part of this legacy I once thought I'd leave to nothing. He paused, letting it land. Elliot didn't wait long. Respectfully, he said, voice smooth, none of us here are disputing the emotional weight of that announcement. But this board was built to protect the structure of Langford Holdings, not manage personal affairs. Graham tilted his head. So my child is now a liability? Elliot smiled thinly. She's an unknown. And what does that make you? Claire said suddenly, stepping forward. Her voice was calm but firm, cutting through the stale air like wind through glass. Rosalind's head turned slightly. Claire continued, You've had 38 years to prove you understand this company, and in all that time, the only thing you've shown is how to protect your own seat at the table. Elliot laughed softly. And you? The woman who vanished for 5 years and now returns with a child just in time to disrupt succession. Claire stepped closer to the table. I left to raise my daughter in peace, not under headlines. Not in this arena. But I came back because I'm not afraid to stand in front of this board and defend what's right, even if I have no title, no shares, and no polished smile. Elliot opened his mouth, but Claire wasn't finished. She is not a move on a board. She's a child, but she's more than that. She's evidence that legacy isn't written in contracts, it's built in character. And I would rather raise Sadie with nothing than watch her inherit power at the cost of her integrity. The room was still. Elliot broke it. So this is the future of Langford? A child and a scandal? No, Rosalind said, her voice quiet but absolute. Every head turned toward her. She stood slowly, her gaze moving across the room before resting on Graham. I've watched this family tear itself apart for decades. Ego, control, posturing. Your grandfather built this empire with his hands, but what he failed to pass down was heart. Her eyes shifted to Claire. Until now, Claire blinked, caught off guard. Rosalind continued, that little girl, she is Langford. Not because of blood, because of what she's made her father become. Then she looked back at Elliot. You've always been clever, but you never once made this family better, and I won't see you rewarded for it. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was final. Rosalind turned to the board. Effective immediately, the succession protocol will recognize Sadie Langford as the rightful heir. I support the will. I support the child. And I support her mother. She walked toward the door. I've made my decision. If the rest of you would like to vote, go ahead. But be sure you understand what you're choosing, name or legacy. And with that, she left the room. Claire didn't move. Graham exhaled slowly, then turned to the board. That'll be all for today. The room emptied quickly. No one made eye contact with Elliot as they passed. When they were alone, Claire looked at Graham. You didn't know she'd do that. I didn't, he said quietly. She meant it. He nodded. For the first time in years, I think she did. Claire stepped closer, her voice soft now. It's done. Graham met her eyes. No, it's just beginning. He reached for her hand. And in the stillness of that empty boardroom, something new began to rise. Not out of inheritance or obligation, but out of love finally made visible. Out of truth finally made loud. Out of a family, claiming itself, out loud and in full view. The Langford estate never sounded like this before. Laughter, light, unfiltered, unapologetically free, rang from the garden as Sadie chased Bubbles across the trimmed lawn, her sneakers darkened with grass stains, curls flying like ribbons behind her. Claire sat on the stone bench under the magnolia tree, watching with a smile tugging at her lips, a book resting forgotten in her lap. Graham was a few feet away, leaning against the railing of the porch with a blanket draped over one arm and 2 mugs in his hands. He watched Claire watch their daughter. There was peace in that. I've never seen her so fearless, he said, stepping down onto the grass and handing Claire her tea. She gets it from you, Claire replied, taking the mug. No, he said softly. She gets it from the woman who faced an entire boardroom without blinking and told the truth no one else had the courage to say. Claire looked up at him. I was terrified. You didn't look it, she smirked. That's because I was too mad to shake. He laughed gently, then sat beside her, pulling the blanket across both their laps. For a while they just watched Sadie run, spin, fall into the grass, and giggle like nothing in the world could ever touch her. And for that moment, it couldn't. Claire leaned into him. Atlanta called this morning. Graham turned slightly, his expression shifting. They confirm she qualifies for the early trial program. Her symptoms are still light. They think we caught it early enough to slow it significantly, maybe even stop it before it gets worse. He exhaled. Thank God. I said we'd come next week. Just for evaluations, but she's going to need you there. You don't even have to ask. Claire nodded slowly, then looked at him. And you? How are you feeling? Stronger than I should, he said. We're ahead of the timeline. My numbers are stable. It's not a cure, but for the first time, I'm planning next month, not just surviving this one. A silence fell between them, warm and full. I kept thinking, Claire said after a moment, that one day we'd wake up and the weight of everything would just disappear. The contracts, the past, the pain. And did it? Graham asked. She turned to him. No. But now it feels like we're carrying it together. That makes it lighter. He nodded, and then looked out towards Sadie again. She called me Dad last night. Just said it, like it had always been that way. Claire's throat tightened. I know. I was at the door. I heard her. It didn't feel like a victory, he whispered. It felt like home. Claire reached for his hand beneath the blanket, fingers sliding between his like a quiet vow. In the days that followed, the house slowly shifted. It wasn't just theirs anymore. It became hers too. Sadie's drawings started appearing on the fridge, her shoes piled next to theirs by the door. Books she couldn't yet read, stacked beside the ones Graham read to her every night. Rosalind visited once, unannounced. She didn't stay long, just enough to sit beside Sadie at the kitchen table, show her how to fold a paper crane, then tell Claire in a quiet voice that she'd changed her will too. I want her to have the house, she said. Not just the money. The memories should live somewhere she's free to run. Claire didn't know what to say. So, she just nodded. By spring, everything had changed. Claire stood under the same magnolia tree in a white dress that fluttered with the breeze. The ceremony was small, just a handful of friends, Dr. Ruiz, Mrs. Delaney, and Sadie, who tossed flower petals like she'd invented joy. Graham waited at the end of the garden path, wearing the same tie he'd worn to their first charity gala. Claire walked toward him, not like a woman walking into obligation, but toward a choice she'd already made 1,000 times in her heart. This time, there were no contracts. No conditions, just vows, real ones. And when Graham held her hands and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me again," Claire smiled with tears in her eyes. I never stopped. As they kissed, the crowd cheered softly, and Sadie shouted, "You can kiss now, it's allowed." Laughter burst through them all. And just like that, a story that began with desperation closed on something far richer. Not a perfect ending, but a true one. Later that night, as stars scattered above the estate and soft music drifted from the open doors, Claire stood barefoot in the grass, watching Sadie fall asleep, curled up in a chair under a blanket. Graham joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Do you think she'll remember this?" he asked. Claire looked at him. "Maybe not the details, but she'll remember what it felt like." He kissed her temple. "What did it feel like?" "Safe," she said, "and full, like a life made whole." They stood in the quiet, the weight of the past behind them, the uncertain hope of tomorrow just beyond the trees. And in that space between what was and what would be, they knew something simple and powerful. Some stories don't end with a twist. They end with a choice. and choosing each other, again and again, was the only legacy that ever truly mattered. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.